I'm the chair of the Ridgewood Arts Council, and this is our 5th Artist Talk. So, so today we have a public video installation artist joining us. He is also a web designer and developer. He is on the faculty of School of Visual Arts in Manhattan, and he is a personal friend of our colleague on the Arts Council, Michael Walsh.
Or so they say.
Yes. So Michael, why don't you do the introductions?
Okay, tell him to keep it short. Eric is a great guy that I met 10 years ago, maybe? And brought him on to the staff at School of Visual Arts, and he not only helped make us, much better, he really improved everyone's knowledge of computing and how we can sort of be more innovative and forward-thinking. So in the industry, they have a term called unicorn, okay? So Eric, you could use that term for Eric as a unicorn, as an artist, as a computer genius, all this other stuff. But that would be too easy, because he's not really a unicorn. What he is a blessing. And if you look up blessing, a blessing is a herd of unicorns. So here he is, Eric Corriel. Show us what you got. Try to make some money.
That is going to be hard to live up to, a herd of unicorns. Well, thank you all for coming here, and thanks for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here. I'm going to start my talk, and I think with most talks, the first question you should probably have is, how long is this going to take? So this is what we're going to do. This is what we're in for this evening. We've got to do a quick background check on me, make sure I'm okay, and talk about my first project, how I started in this line of work, and then how that moved into site-specific installations. We'll talk a little bit about that, and how that evolved into more of a socially oriented practice, which is where I'm at now. And then lastly, an offshoot of my art practice, which revolves around digital visualizations. So those times are approximate. Don't hold me to them. So my background is in computer science, which is what I started studying when I went to college. And then about 2 years of computer science, I got really interested in philosophy and changed my major. So you can imagine that conversation with mom of, hey, I'm going to be somebody who's going to work in a field that actually pays, into one that, doesn't really pay anything at all. That went really well, and she loved that whole decision process. Which only improved when a year after that I told her that I was going to be an artist, which is basically, I think, most parents' academic nightmare for their children. But I will say that, all of those things really do come together in a way that I'm going to hopefully demonstrate. And just as a quick shout out to any college-bound people in the audience, I would totally recommend taking at least one philosophy class in school. It might not be something that would have occurred to you, but it really is a great discipline that encourages you to think better about everything. It's you learn more about economics if you take an economics class, but I feel like you learn more about thinking if you do some studying philosophy. So if that was never on your radar, let that at least be on your radar right now. So how did I start doing this? This was my first project ever in New York. But let me go and tell you about how I got there. So this is a project I started in art school, and I was fortunate enough to be on a trip in Spain, and was just kind of doing these vector-based marker drawings at the time. This was of the landscape in southern Spain. There were some elements of the landscape. I'm not even sure what that red that red slash in the back was now, but obviously it appealed to me. And so I was kind of just making these drawings like, any kid on an art trip, I guess, or any art kid on a trip. And when I got back to school, I kind of took those drawings, scanned them in, made them into basically an illustration. Right? This is an Illustrator file, vector-based drawing. And then, so that was kind of the first translation from drawing to digital. And then from here, once it's already in Illustrator, you can kind of, print it out. So I started to make these screen prints and I found a paper that I really liked. It was this yellow vellum type paper that would allow the light to kind of shine through, which I felt captured a sense of that landscape that I was initially trying to go for. And then I started working with, installing these in windows, which, unbeknownst to me at the time, would be something I was going to be doing a lot of later in my life. So again, kind of just being interested in the light, the interplay with, with this form in this drawing. And I was just kind of interested in playing with things around and wanting to move this forward. I did big mock-ups like this, which never got realized, but it was kind of fun to do. And then, I started to think more about, how can I push this even further? And I started to look at that the band in between these two trees here, and thinking about animating that. And so this was one of the early, one of my really early animations. This is, for anybody who's familiar with 3D modeling software, this is a Maya animation, a dynamics-based animation. Again, it's just taking that little piece of that drawing and doing, and breathing life into it in a sense, giving it motion. So now that I had this, which of course now we've gone from that vector drawing to a 3D, or rather just an animation, I was interested in projecting it, right, to show it. So I wanted to project it really big. This was part of my thesis project in art school. And I projected as big as I could at the time. This thing was probably about 12, 15 feet or something like that. And again, my aim was to show, to make this thing feel like a landscape. And it was, of course, animated, had the sound, so it was this big, really abstract landscape movement piece. And that's kind of how it stayed for a while. That was the final form. And then when I was done with art school, I moved to Brooklyn, like any aspiring artist does, and was starting to apply for things. And I got accepted into this gallery in Gowanus. It was, next to a tire shop and a window repair place. And they were doing a show. They were soliciting work for a show on the contemporary landscape. So I submitted this piece, with everything I basically just showed you. And it got accepted in the show. I was thrilled. I was ecstatic. That was my first thing. It was going to be in New York, even though it was, Gowanus, but still. And when I went to go meet the curator at the gallery, they said, look, this is really great, but look, this is a group show. There's 30 other artists in it. The thing that you had this big, we're going to just project it that big on the wall. And as happy as I was to be in a show, any show, I was not so happy about that. And I just, to me, this thing was about monumentality. It was about capturing a large swath of land or landscape. And that really didn't sit well with me, so I started to kind of think about how could this be otherwise. And I started to have these crazy ideas, well, what if I just projected it on the building, huge, from outside? And I made these mock-ups, which are the worst mock-ups I've ever made in my life. And I would kind of just, do this and send this out back to the curators after they told me, we're going to do it this big. Well, what if we did it like that? And they looked at these and they said, well, that'd be amazing. Can you do that? And of course I said, yeah, of course I can do that. Why couldn't I do that? And they said, well, you mean you're going to have the projectors to project on brick from outside? And I'm like, yeah. And they're going to require generators, right? So you're going to get generators? I was like, the generators, got that. And then the sound, so you're going to do, what? Outdoor speakers? How are you going to... Yes, outdoor speakers, exactly what I was thinking, for sure. And the permitting, right? Because this is going to be, out on the street? It was oh, right, yeah, I have to look into. So I, yes, my way out of that meeting, and then got home and started Googling about how much all that would cost. I think it was somewhere around $60,000, at least, which is about $59,900 less than I was willing to spend. So I started to think about alternatives. And this is where the site-specific nature really started with me. And by that I just mean, I would bike to this gallery, and I would stand outside of it until I had an idea, and I wasn't going to leave until I had an idea. So I started to think. I biked there, and I was looking at it, the space, and I couldn't project like this, or rather like that. That's the actual gallery space. Wasn't going to do that. But what could I do? So I started to think, well, what if I projected from the inside, in the windows? It would be a hell of a lot more feasible. I could actually pull it off, and it would achieve the same sense of scale that I initially was going for. So I kind of just came up with this idea, did another mock-up, sent it back out to them, and they were like, oh, sure, that'd be cool. And of course I did it the whole building, but what it ended up becoming is that, which was something that I felt I was totally happy with. And to me, it marked the end of that piece for sure, but also like this journey from trying to capture a sense of the natural landscape and then inserting it into this urban landscape seemed to me a kind of fitting resolution for that whole process. So once I started to once I did this, I really started to like this idea of working in windows. I live in an urban environment. That windows are literally all around us, and it seemed to make sense to kind of use that as a material, right, as a kind of a support. So I started to think more about that, and just kind of keep my eyes open for opportunities that seemed to maybe, and there weren't a lot of people doing this kind of stuff at that time. So the next thing that came up was a group that was called Windows Brooklyn, and they did they were only around, I think, for like 2 years, and I just happened to catch them, I guess. They basically paired shop owners with artists along Smith Street and Carroll Gardens in Brooklyn. So they, and I should also say that when I went to grad school abroad and I came back to New York, which is where I'm from, not knowing anybody. Like, I didn't know anybody in the art world at all. So anything that I was getting were just open calls that were on the website NYFA, New York Foundation for the Arts. They have a really robust, they're kind of like a clearinghouse for any kind of art. Like galleries looking for artists looking for representation, whatever. So anything I was just getting was getting off the web. And this Windows Brooklyn group, they would put an open call out, and I applied to that. I was like, oh, windows, like shop windows, like, yeah, I just did this other thing, like, I'd love to do that. So this is a shoe store, and I don't remember what my original ideas was, but when I went there to like talk to the owners of the store and kind of just study the site and see who walks by and when and what does it look like from this angle and that angle. At a certain point, I went by and I noticed that they put a gate down every night, and whatever my original idea was, that ruined it. I was like, oh man, what am I gonna do? This gate? Like, how do you? So then I just had to think of something else. So I thought of, oh well, a gate, it kind of looks like a zoo. It's like, what if it's like this big creature that lives behind a gated, cage and can only look out at people as they walk by. So I did this idea, and then thinking about like that door kind of functions as a nose, and this was a piece that was done with relatively simple motion tracking technology. It tracked whatever was walking by, whether it's a person or a car or anything like that. And of course it's cute, right? It looks cute, but it's also touches on themes of surveillance and how we're kind of constantly being fed that more and more surveillance is better and better for our safety, right? So there's always this veneer of public safety over any calls for surveillance, right? So it's got this palatable sheen to it, but at the end of the day, right, we are still being watched. So this was a piece that every day I would have to, they were not down to just have their windows basically obstructed by this piece during the day, right? They wanted their shoes to be seen, so I would have to come in every day. This was only for a week, and kind of take that down and put it back up. So in a very different vein, but still continuing on this theme of site specificity, a curator asked me to participate in a festival on Staten Island called Lumen, and this particular festival is being held in an emptied out Olympic swimming pool. So what do you do if somebody asks you to, do an art piece in a swimming pool? Like, I have no idea. Never been asked that before. So I did what I did for every other piece, was I just went there and biked over there and, went into this pool and wasn't going to get out of the pool until I had an idea. So I go into the pool and I'm like walking around. This, it's just an empty pool. It's not really much to talk about or to describe it other than that. And, it's like, okay, I'm in a pool. Like, okay, now what? And I noticed that, like, if I'm in a pool, I kind of I walk a little bit differently. You kind of walk a little bit slower. I was tending to look down at my feet just because I feel like, I don't know, when you're in a pool, you do that differently. And so I kind of just start this, which really brings about this very sharp one-point perspective, right? If you're just looking straight down, you get this vanishing point in the middle of your feet. So I started to think, okay, well, we're in a pool, we kind of move around differently, we have this different perspective, potentially. What if it's, what if it's like a portal, like you got this like portal imagery that is like sucking you in, and if it's something where you can't see your feet, it's as though your feet have already gone. So I created this, and this is my biggest fan ever. This is Rory. It's a top-down projection onto a pool of milk. Milk, yeah. Mostly powdered milk, but also condensed milk, any kind of milk. I wasn't really, the cheapest way I could fill a pool with milk was what I was going for. So, in terms of the concept behind a piece like this, there really isn't one. I think it's really fun. I think a lot of people found it really fun. It responds to the site. It responded to, the way in which people, act a little bit differently when they're in water and stuff. Kids loved it. Parents less so, because then their kids were just filled with sopping wet with milk. He closed out the whole thing. He was there. He was literally in there for like hours. And his parents told me that he's only had one other reaction like that to artwork, which was with a Dan Flavin exhibition. So I was felt rather complimented.
So why milk and not water?
Because water wouldn't reflect the image, so it needed to be, yeah, exactly, liquid canvas. I don't know why it does that. That was the mom, by the way, in the chair, just waiting. So yeah, I mean, this piece was definitely a lot of fun. Then moving on one more of these site-specific ones, this piece that I did called Lightbox, and similarly to that other one, a curator reached out to me and had seen my work in another thing. I was like, oh, I work at the Holographic Society of New York. We're doing a show on Governor's Island. Like, would you want to have a piece for a few weeks on Governor's Island? Of course, I was like, yeah, sure, great. Well, yeah, sounds awesome. But what do you do for the Holographic Society? Like, I don't know. I never had any experience with holograms or other than, Princess Leia in Star Wars or whatever. So I didn't know much about holograms. It wasn't really an interest of mine or anything like that. But I wanted to do something. I wanted to make it cool. So I went there. I went to the site. I went to the where it was going to be, and I went to their museum. And I was like, oh, okay, got it. Okay, I kind of get this stuff. So I decided what I was going to do is going to try and make a box of light around your head. That was it. Just going to make a box of light around your head. So it was going to be like 4 planes of light, like that, and you were just going to be encased in walls of light. So this is that piece. So I don't do too many making of videos for my work, but I did one for this one. So I'm going to show that to you just to give you a sense of how that piece got made. This was the contraption that basically needed to be built to project. It's very difficult, turns out, to project just a very thin, like something that would read as a wall of light. Light expands very quickly in all directions. So this was the contraption that I came up with to actually try and make those walls of light. That's my dad. We actually make a lot of this stuff together. That's my brother, by the way. So, thank you. Yeah, so that was my brother and my dad in that video who were helping me. I try and use as much free labor as I can. So, where my work started to go after that is more socially oriented kind of things. So, specifically, mostly related to to climate change and trying to make work about that. So, I guess it's just part of an evolution towards wanting to become more, engaged with the world and the things that are going around me, I think it's super cool and fun making the site-specific stuff and just kind of having fun with doing what kind of just comes naturally out of my brain from just looking at a certain site. But this is also, I think for me, certainly more fulfilling type work. So this piece is called Water Will Be Here. I'm about to show you. It's really been my most successful piece, is certainly in terms of being shown. It's been actually all over. Just recently made its European debut in Biennial, Norway, and it's addressing issues related to climate change and rising sea levels, and the question of what it would look like, feel like, were sea levels to rise to the point where our cities might be flooded. Oh, sorry. So, basically responding to issues related to climate change and rising sea levels, and the question of what it would look like, feel like, were our cities to be flooded by rising sea levels. So this is again using the same means of projecting into windows, but in this installation it's obviously different in that people are expected to, or I actually didn't expect this would happen at all, to be perfectly honest, but people ended up just putting themselves in the video projection, right? So they're kind of in a way putting themselves in climate change, so to speak, and doing it this way turns the building itself into a part of the work in the sense where it's now a container for this ocean of water. So this is, I think this is the largest installation I've done. It's about 225 feet long in the Castleberry Hill district of Atlanta, which this was in 2011, so not long after the market crash of '08. And they had built a tremendous commercial complex that they just couldn't rent. So they were very open to installations like this. This was for a festival called Flux in Atlanta, which doesn't really exist in the same form anymore, but it was basically a this was one night only festival. There was a lot of other artists around.
Was the step there by happenstance?
Which, the step?
Standing up.
Oh yeah, no, that's part of the sill. Yeah, it's part of the windowsill, yeah.
When you brought it to those other cities, was it as big?
No, it's taken variable forms. It's been big. It just hasn't been this big. Like I've done, do I have a slide of it? Let's see. I'll show you some of the other cities. This is what it's like on the inside. You can see all the projectors on I guess that would be on the upper left, upper right. There's 12 projectors, so 12 channel video installation. I guess I don't have the other cities, but yeah, it's been, I could do a quick thing after. This is a similarly inspired piece, yet just with fire, responding to the uptick in wildfires across the globe. Most recently, of course, in California. This was done way before that, but this piece here was about giving people the kind of like the conceptual a framework, and the other piece too, giving people a framework within which they could experience climate change like here and now in their own backyard. I know we hear so much about it, and we read about it, and we listen to people on the radio talk about it, and we see things on TV and news reports and all that. I take my job or my role in that whole discourse to be to give people the experience of it, right? There's an experiential dimension that we don't get from all the other media, I think, that an artist is uniquely capable of giving, right? Putting people in it, in their own backyards, like bringing it to them. And the latest piece I did in that vein is this piece called Glaciers Will Not Be There. And for this piece, I was fortunate enough to actually travel to the Arctic to film some of it. On an artist residence there, some of it I did not film. But it basically, this is an interactive video installation. So as people walk in front of the screen, whether they realize it or not, they are triggering glacial collapse. but he was gracious enough to give it to me.
Oh, your boss let you go for the month?
Yeah. And then this piece I did in 2016 called Targeted. One of my curator friends was doing a show in Chinatown. She asked me to be part of it. I went in with a completely blank slate, as I often do, and hadn't thought anything about it. And it just so happened we happened to have our meeting set for the day after Philando Castile had been shot by police, which was just the day before Alton Sterling was shot by police. And so, Black Lives Matter was kind of the only thing that I could think about. And so I started to think, my place in that issue, right? Of course, I think, like many people, I had the inclination to be like, oh my God, like how, obviously this is horrible what's happening in this country with regards to African Americans on this issue. And while I can, I'm perfectly comfortable saying how horrible that is, to what extent can I really empathize, right, with their pain? Do I really know what that's like? And the answer is, of course not. So I wanted to make something to address that empathy gap, I guess, and to give people people like me, or people who are not systematically targeted, a sense of what that might feel like, right? If only for a few seconds as they're maybe walking down the street. So this was certainly my most kind of aggressive piece. So, that piece was aggressive in the sense where you did not ask to engage with it. It engaged with you automatically as you walked down the street. It was on Baxter Street in Chinatown. So, and of course, I think actually everything that I've shown thus far have really been napkin sketches that I've kind of come up with and just, flew pretty much solo and executing all the way to from conception to execution. This piece though was different. It was actually the first piece that I really felt like I needed to ask people if that was okay. And by that I mean minorities. So, the last thing I wanted to do as an artist taking on the topic of race in this country, which is explosive enough as it is rub salt in any wounds or anything like that. So, I would really kind of, I'd be like taking an Uber pool with somebody, and if that somebody was African American, I'd be like, yo, I'm just working on this idea. I just need an opinion on this. Is this like the worst thing ever, or is this like okay? And I did that a lot, and I did that to all kinds of people. Living in Brooklyn gives you the opportunity to do that. It's actually very easy. And the feedback that I got was that no, this is not the worst thing ever. This is actually really good. Be aware of these criticism, which you're susceptible to, but this piece should you should not do this piece. So if you were to walk into the gallery, you would then see a screen like this, and you go from being the targeted to the surveiller. So then you get to watch other people being targeted and get to see their reactions to that. And it produces a lot of imagery that looks like this, and like that, and like that. And this was during the opening, and I found this really interesting. So after the opening, she put on Instagram, and I'll read it. I've been targeted. Throwback to last night at the art opening of Polaris, curated by the fabulous Joey Lico. Love doing my OOTD, which I had to look up, is Outfit of the Day, in this interactive piece of art by Eric Corriel. It also made me think about how, as a blonde white woman, I never have to worry about being a target of police profiling, but many others aren't so lucky. Go see the show. I was like, wow, oh man, okay, wow, great. And then I went to look back at her Instagram post a few weeks later, and she changed it to, I've been targeted. Love doing my Outfit of the Day in this interactive piece of art by Eric Corriel. Throwback to last night at the art opening of Polaris, created by the fabulous Joey Lico. So, I don't know why she did that, but that's what happened. So, just put it there. Okay, let me change gears to the computer science part of my brain. If that was the kind of the philosophical part, now we're getting into the computer science part. And I've been earning my living in computer science or as a programmer for forever, since college. And one of the things that I've always been kind of fascinated by is the way that we refer to files and folders. And by that I mean, it's 2018. I don't know what percentage of our lives are led digitally, but it seems like quite a bit. Yet, and correct me if I'm wrong and let me know, but I've only heard two conceptions of what a file is. I think we only have two. If I ask somebody what a file is, I get one of two answers. One is it's a collection of, it's a series of zeros and ones. That's a file, a digital file. Okay, nobody really knows what that is. Or I'll get it's an icon with on my desktop. Yeah, fair enough. So I'm going to give you all a thought experiment right now. Imagine that you could shrink yourself down super, 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 super small and swim around inside of your hard drive where all your files are. Okay? What would you actually see? You probably have a resume.pdf file floating around in there, right? So if you had to meet that file and shake its hand, what are you looking at as you do that? So you could think about that for a second, because I'm about to show you what I think that looks like. So this series that I'm about to introduce is called Enter the Machine, and that's the idea. It's the idea of thinking about our files and folders in a non-generic way. So if you think about the second definition of what a file is, like it's a file it's an icon with a label, true, but it kind of doesn't do justice, really, in my opinion, to the unique data structure that is that file, right? All of our files are different, just like we're all different, right? We all have unique DNA. Our files also have unique DNA. Otherwise, we'd open them up and they'd all be the same thing. But they're not. They're all different. So, yet, an icon with a label totally genericizes that whole idea, right? They all look exactly the same. but they're not. So we talk a lot about, like biological diversity, ecodiversity, but what about like digital diversity? Like what does that look like? So my answer to that question is expressed through this series, and I was saying, Enter the Machine. And like I was saying here, I'm just going to give you a quick intro to it, right? This could be a file, as is conceived of by many people, right? That's a series of zeros and ones. It's very easy to go from zeros and ones. It's kind of like going from English to Spanish to go to like a hexadecimal format. So that's if zeros is 1 is base 2, then this is base 16, but it's basically more or less the same thing. And this is the same file, just kind of like translated. And if you kind of just apply the right spacing to that file, you can get something that looks like this, which for anybody who works in design or in Photoshop or anything like that, this will start to look like colors to you. These are ways of expressing colors on the computer. Just if you don't believe me, just trust me, it's true. So each one of these is like a color. And it's the same information, just kind of formatted differently. And if you can kind of think of, this is how I started to think of files, as structural information that can be grouped in some way that actually becomes meaningful, like this, then you can start to think about, well, maybe a file looks like that. This is just kind of like any ordinary MOV file is on my desktop. And what I was trying to do, so I've kind of created an algorithm that will take any file and give it its own unique visual identity, its own portrait. So I call these file portraits, and again, you could give me any file and it would be its own special snowflake, so to speak. This is my friend's resume PDF file. I'm sure yours would look completely different. If you're wondering about the colors, those were chosen by me. Like I said, that PDFs were going to be this greenish orangey color. Text, this is a text file, a log file. That was going to be a green color. And if you kind of get the idea of what a file portrait is, you can get the idea of what a group of files would look like, right? So we have of our kids, we have portraits, and then we have the class portrait, class photo. So this is the class photo, if you will, of my Dropbox folder, right? This is all of them. This is all my files. It's a complete mess, as you can see. And it's a lot of different files, right? Different types of files, hence all the different colors. This is a detail version of that. Each kind of identifiable little chunk there is its own file that's kind of floating around in there. This is a sliver of my iTunes folder, just a handful of MP3s, my compilations A through E. So this series was basically stopping along the way, making multiple stops along my hard drive. So one of them was like, a sliver of my iTunes folder. We just saw my Dropbox folder. I did my, what does my desktop look like? What does my downloads folder look like? What does a portion of like Mac OS X look like? This is what the show looked like. The way that these express themselves finally were in lightbox form. That was the hard drive that started it all, kind of in the middle there. This is what the show looked like. Here's a little preview of video. And these lightboxes were all pulsing very softly, addressing like this idea of breath, of entering a machine. Those are passwords. So this show is, this body of work is I'm still working on it. Actually that was like kind of 1.0 version. Now I'm on a 2.0, which is actually on view now. If you go to the 92nd Street Y website, and if you see John Oliver, and just scroll a little bit past him, you see there on the left, that's a panel discussion I'm going to be doing at the 92nd Street Y on February 9th, but the show is up, I think, until the 19th. There are certain hours that are best to go if you want to. You can find that on my website, the hours and stuff like that. So this, I'm going to give you a, this is where I'm at now with this series. So if 1.0 was about kind of the visualization of a file, giving it a visual form and talking about file portraits, 2.0 now is about looking how files are formed, which is to say the encoding process. So this is how so if you take the MP3, that is this Beethoven String Quartet, this is how I make it into that form that I showed you earlier. So that goes on, but I'm gonna keep going. So this is what the show looks like at the 90-second shoot. Why? So in the middle is one of the light boxes, which is from the first series, and to the left and right of it are these digital frames, which I'm increasingly interested in. And those frames are put out by a company called Mural. They are commercially available. I think they're like $600 or something now, but they're kind of interesting for digital artists like me because, well, A, they actually pay me to make work, which is great, and there's a lot of talk about whether that's going to be the future of the home, like art in the home for a lot of people. It's a really interesting kind of platform. So this show juxtaposes the analog and the digital forms of art. It's kind of an interesting thing. This is what the back of one of those light boxes looks like. The thing kind of up in the upper middle there, that's a microcontroller that controls the pulsing of the lights, and everything else is a lot of wires. And the phones are just for playing the music for the MP3s and stuff. So if you like that stuff, you can actually download it for your phone on the lock screen. That's some of my contact info, so if anybody ever wants to get in touch with me, please do. And I would like to just give a special shout out to Michael Walsh, because I would say that 80% of the work that I showed you here was done while I was working under that guy at SVA. And and to be given to be given the kind of the understanding to be able to be free enough to develop that stuff and to be encouraged to do it is really a rare find, I think. And I was very fortunate that to meet Michael and for him to be supportive of my art practice in the way that he has been. So Michael, thank you for and if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to take any. Yes.
So in terms of this last, so the colors are, you chose the colors based on the type of file,
Yeah.
but then like the actual, how do you get that like the flaky look to that?
Yeah, like the form itself.
Yeah.
So the short answer is I had an idea in my head of what I wanted these to look like, and then I created an algorithm that would generate that form. It took a long time, like many iterations of coding to say, no, that's not how I want it to look. And it needed to be something that would give a unique result each time for each file, right? But it also had to look. I wanted it to look good, and I wanted it to do justice to this idea that I had in my head. So it's not like it happened accidentally. It was a very deliberate process that took a long time of honing the algorithm to get it to be where I wanted it to be.
On that, is there a direct, like you set something in a direction according to a sound or a type of file, or you give attributes to especially in the sound, I think you really see how it build out.
Right.
Into, like a back growing
Yeah.
bacteria.
Yeah, all of that is done. It's not according to, like, if it's a sound file, it moves like this, and if it's an image file, it moves like that. It's not. It's one algorithm kind of rules them all, and it's a kind of happy accident when they work out. And it's like, oh, that actually looks like it, like it's dictating how it moves. That's great. They're not all like that, but yeah. So it's a lot of kind of tweaking one thing to be able to handle a multitude of inputs.
In your research for the targeted
Yeah.
show, I saw that there. But did you find places where they were actually have cameras around the city in your research about that? Where they kind of do that very thing where they're identifying people?
Yeah, I mean it's a thing now. I mean, like, all the cameras now know whether you're, assumedly they know whether you're gay or straight. They know whether you're happy or sad. They know if you're male, female, or anything else.
Somebody, a human being is like
It-
profiling.
I mean, it's all
Remote
yeah.
cameras.
Yeah, I mean, it's all being done through like AI algorithms very, very, very quickly. But yeah, the amount of
Big Brother watching us.
yeah,
IBM.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Another question about the targeting one. When you saw the people and they had the crosshairs on them, how did they know other than looking down?
So yeah, I should have explained it.
Was there like a mirror?
Yeah. So you're walking down the street, okay, and there was a just go to the web. I'm not connected. Basically, there was a what's the Wi-Fi library? Okay. There was a so outside of the gallery. It looked like that. So this here,
You can see yourself.
Okay.
yeah, these are TVs, but they're reflecting you. And this is where the sound emanates from, and the camera is right in there. So it was kind of disguised to be looking like it's part of the gallery. But yeah, you would hear it first, and that's police scanner audio taken from the airwaves. And then you would turn, and then you would see. That was,
People disconcerted.
yeah, people were disconcerted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes it was describing something that was sort of like that.
Right.
Sometimes
Yeah, I thought at first that
Yeah.
we had somebody inside who's
Yeah.
profiling.
Right. Yeah, no, it was random. I had a whole bunch of different clips, and then it would randomly assign. Sometimes it worked out actually pretty well. I mean,
How long was it up there? How long did you run that?
I think that was a while. I think it was like 6 weeks or something like that. Yeah.
You got a lot of pressure on it too, right?
No, not so much. September 7th through October 15th. Actually, this piece, I have to be honest, I was, worried. I mean, I just didn't know what to expect. And actually nothing. nothing really happened. I mean, people did notice it, and people walked by it, and it was a factor for those who happened to walk down this one street in Chinatown, but it didn't didn't make a ruckus. Just to get to the other.
And the recordings from the 911 or whatever that was, is that in public domain?
It's public domain.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, it's actually very easy to get. These are some of the other places where the water piece was. It started off in Brooklyn and Dumbo. This was the Atlanta version. It was in Toronto. Southampton was indoor, like that.
Did you have one of those where you had a live feed?
I had I had this performance.
Right, where it was actually somewhere, it was filming live from somewhere a few miles away or something.
No.
Or was it? Okay.
And this was a recent one in Baltimore, in the Science Museum in Baltimore.
I have a question about targeting.
Yeah.
How was the participation rate in that? What percentage of people actually were oblivious?
It's a great question. Well, it's not just for that piece; it's for all of my work. And the funny thing is, like, when I give talks like this, or I show people my work on my phone, I normally get a decent response, and it's like, oh, that's so cool. I love that. Blah blah blah. But the truth is, you know, if that same person were to actually walk by it on the street, they would 90% walk right past it. I think that's just a condition of being, you know, in New York, and we're conditioned to have blinders on. Just there's everything all around. So the percentage of people who actually notice these window installations as they're up is low. You know, I would say it's I would not say it's more than 15%. That would be a highly generous number, I would say.
You know, it seems to make sense because there's just a lot of visual.
There's a lot, yeah. It's different with that one because it had sound. Most of the other ones didn't, and that's another factor. So, people noticed that one, I think, a little bit more. But yeah, I'd say overall, you know, it's not like you put it up and everybody stops in their tracks. That is not what happens.
I wanted to see that glacier come all the way at me and film.
Yeah.
Stay there.
It might have been dangerous to film, but yeah. Yeah.
The one with the water rising, now was that filming an actual?
Yeah, I filmed that. Yeah, I filmed that myself in Red Hook, where I live. And yeah, that was seems simple, but it was actually very, you know, it was kind of difficult to get that. Yeah, but yeah. So a lot of this work is like, it's a combination of film, it's custom software, it's coding, it's 3D software sometimes. Kind of just use whatever tricks of the trade I need to use. Yeah.
All right. That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank
Eric.
you.